As a volleyball player, I'm always trying to find ways to gain an edge on the competition. One way that I've looked into is supplementing creatine into my diet. Creatine supplementation basically increases the concentration of creatine in your muscles. So for an average diet, you have about 60 to 80% creatine concentration in your muscles. So supplementing creatine into your diet will increase that concentration to 100%. What the increased concentration does is improves the output of ATP in your muscles. ATP is the main fuel of muscle contractions and athletic movements. In this video, we will look to answer the question, should I take creatine as a volleyball player? To measure creatine's effect on volleyball performance, the first thing I did was break volleyball down into 3 athletic movements. The first of those is vertical jump, the second is agility, and the third is recovery. I chose vertical jump as a metric of study because it is one of the most important skills to have for volleyball. You use it in hitting, blocking, serving, and just general volleyball playing. I chose agility as the second metric, as that's pretty much the next thing that you're looking for, especially liberos and defensive specialists, is really moving to get that mispassed ball or ball that bounced off the block. The third metric I looked at was recovery. Recovery is super important as a volleyball player, especially because in game you want to be going as hard as you can, and while you're training you want to have the most effective training you can possibly have. So boosting your recovery is a very important part of playing volleyball. All right, so let's get into creatine's effect on vertical jump. I looked at 5 studies when researching creatine's effect on vertical jump, but the main one I'm going to be referencing in this video is a study on jumping performance among elite men's volleyball players. So what this study basically did was it took 12 players from Sherbrooke University and put them on a 4-week creatine supplementation plan and measured the effect that 4 weeks had on their vertical jump and block height. This study's results were a little bit confusing, but what it's basically saying is that creatine will not have any effect on your vertical jump over a 4-week supplementation period. It did, however, seem to have an effect on block height, whether that's because blocking is maybe a slower movement than approach vertical jump or mixed up data or something like that. So basically what it's saying is that creatine doesn't have an effect on your vertical jump over a 4-week period. The reasons for this are a little bit vague. From the research that I've done, it seems that because the vertical jump takes only about 0.2 seconds to perform, the ATP stores that are increased in your muscles after taking creatine don't really have an effect on that quick of movements. Another reason for this could be the added weight gain that creatine supplementation tends to induce on people taking it. So even if creatine had a small boost in your vertical jump, that might be canceled out by the 5 to 7 pounds of weight gain that you'll see when you supplement creatine into your diet. One thing to note about this is that creatine supplementation doesn't have a negative effect on vertical jump, and that's seen across all the studies that I looked at. They didn't really see an increase in vertical jump, but there was no decrease. The next metric I'll be looking at is agility and creatine's effect on agility more specifically. So because there's not many studies on creatine for volleyball players, I had to bring in data from other sports. So the 2 main ones I looked at was soccer and football. Football has the shuttle run, that is a commonly performed exercise, so there's a bunch of studies on that. And then soccer, just general agility is really important to be a good soccer player. So for the soccer study, I looked at a study on a women's national team before the Olympics. What this study did was it took 20 elite women's soccer players and put them on a 12-week creatine supplementation plan and measured the effect of creatine supplementation on agility times versus placebo. So what this study found was that creatine has a statistically significant effect on agility times. So over the group of 10 women who took creatine versus the placebo, there was a noticeable drop in time for their agility test that they did. The study I looked at for football players' shuttle run times was Creatine Supplementation and Athletic Performance by Susan B. Richette. This looked at a lot of different metrics of creatine supplementation, like the bad side effects and the just general good side effects. And what it basically found was that overall, shuttle times decreased after taking creatine versus a placebo. And this goes with other data that I've seen while researching this. And basically, since the shuttle run takes more than about a second, you can use the ATP stores that creatine supplementation increases. So yeah, creatine supplementation should boost your agility. The final metric that I looked at was creatine's effect on recovery. So generally, creatine is thought to have a positive effect on recovery, shortening recovery times and lessening overall fatigue in high intensity movements, but I wanted to see if that was actually true. So the main study that I looked at was creatine for exercise and sports performance with recovery considerations for healthy populations by Benjamin Wax. And this study's results were kind of conflicting. On one hand, it reduces the lactic acid buildup in your muscles, which is generally a sign of soreness and just muscle fatigue. It also reduced the creatine kinase released when exercising. So creatine kinase is a chemical released by your body when your muscles are damaged and they need to start healing again. On the other hand, it didn't really have a noticeable effect on people's perception of soreness. So that could affect your training, specifically if you're in pain from training the day before from just being sore. But overall, what I found is that creatine positively affects recovery. A final note that I'd like to make is the possible negative side effects of taking creatine. So the stigma around creatine is that you'll have bowel issues or nausea if you take too much, especially during the loading phase. But in my experience, I haven't really had that happen, and this could be for a multitude of reasons. The main one that I found is the FDA doesn't actually approve creatine, so there's not a standardized procedure for making and purifying it. What this means for people that want to supplement creatine into their body is that they have to do the research on their own. So basically, get good creatine that you know is pure, and you can do research on your own for this. The one that I recommend is linked in the description. So for some evidence towards this claim that creatine doesn't really have any negative effects, I looked at adverse effects of creatine supplementation by Jacques Portmans. What this study basically did was looked at all the negative side effects that creatine supplementation could have and tested people and looked at the results. And what they basically found was that the results were inconclusive. So this can mean a few different things. It can mean that some of the batches were bad creatine and they were causing adverse side effects, or it could mean that creatine's negative side effects are a person-to-person thing. And I'm more of the belief that depending on the batch of creatine that you're taking, you can have negative side effects, but it also could just be because I am good with taking creatine. So my recommendation is that if you want to take creatine, buy pure stuff and try it out. Don't go full into the loading period until you know that you won't have any bad side effects. So to conclude, as a volleyball player, I would recommend taking creatine. It doesn't affect your vertical jump, but the recovery aids that creatine can incur over time will let you train harder every practice and increase your vertical jump versus if you didn't take creatine. As far as agility goes, the statistical increase or decrease in agility times is undeniable at this point. So if you want to be quicker on your feet, you want to be moving around the court quicker to pick up balls, I would recommend taking creatine. And then finally, the recovery aspect of creatine supplementation is super important to volleyball players. Playing volleyball 5 or 6 days a week, I need to be recovering. I can't just go to training dead tired every single day and expect to get a good practice out. So taking creatine can help me practice better throughout the week and maintain my strength better throughout the week. So to conclude, I would recommend taking creatine as a volleyball player if you don't experience any bad side effects. So how should you supplement creatine if you want to supplement creatine? From the research I've done, I've looked at multiple studies. The general practice is to spend 5 to 7 days loading creatine. And so what this is doing is basically increasing the creatine content in your muscles to 100%. And so to do this, you're supposed to take 20 grams of creatine over a 5 to 7 day period. After that 5 to 7 day period, you want to be taking about 5 grams a day, which is usually a scoop that you get with your creatine, or 0.1 grams per kilograms. So for example, me being around 170 pounds, which is about 77 kilograms, I should be taking about 7.7 grams of creatine per day. So for actually intaking creatine, I would recommend having it with a meal or having it in your pre-workout before your workout, just so you can get it in every day and not really worry about it. One thing that I would like to say is that creatine, like the ability of it to dissolve in water, is brand to brand. Again, it's not, there's not a specific way to make it, so it can vary brand by brand. But in my experience, if you have warm water or a hot drink, creatine will dissolve completely and you won't be able to taste it at all. If you're drinking from colder drinks, like I usually have mine in Gatorade, you will be able to taste the graininess of creatine a little bit, but generally, if it's in a flavored drink, it won't really matter as much. Things to expect when on creatine. So after intaking creatine, your loading phase, it'll get pretty annoying taking in 20 grams of creatine a day, but generally I do it in 2 drinks of 10 grams each, 10 grams of creatine each. You will probably notice a 5 to 7 pound weight increase. This is just water, it's not fat, it's not muscle. So you will increase in weight. In my experience, I increase about 2 pounds, but I'm kind of unique in that from what I've heard. Generally though, you shouldn't be experiencing any bad side effects from taking creatine. So if you are, I would recommend either slowing down the creatine intake and seeing if the bad side effects go away, or if you still want to take creatine, trying a different brand to see if those bad side effects stay.